So unfortunately, university professors consistently fail to explain the difference between a class and an object and what that actually means. Obviously, you need to understand this before you can start working in object-oriented programming languages and actually write object-oriented programming code. So in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to explain this to you. Let's get it. All right, so on my screen here, I'm just going to write a few variables. So I have x equals 1, y equals string. Now, what do we know about these variables? Well, we know that each of these variables have a type, right? We know data types exist in Python, and one is type int, and this string here is type str. We have a bunch of other types as well, and depending on the value that we use, it has a different type. Now, what you need to understand about the type of an object is that is really the class that was used to create the object. Now, it's a bit hidden here in Python because something like 1 and something like string are built into the language, and when I write 1, I don't have to explicitly say, oh, I'm going to use the int class to define this. However, there is an int class, and there is a str or string class that exists in Python, and anytime you do something like create a new string or create a new int, you are using that class to create the object, okay? So almost anything you see in Python, so something like 1, something like 2, something like a list, something like a function, these are all objects, and they all have a type. The type is the class that was used to create them. And even though you don't necessarily see that, that's still their type, right? So we know this is an int, we know this is a string. Now, the class is really a blueprint that defines the functionality that an object has. The reason why I can do something like z is equal to 1 plus 1 is because the int class, which is the type of these two objects, defines that I can add two integers together. If it didn't define that, I couldn't add them together. Same reason I can use subtraction, multiplication, same reason I can use any operation you see in Python. It's because the class, which is the type of the object, defines that behavior. It says I can add these two objects. Now let's look at this example. What if I try to do 1 plus str? Well, this is not an accepted operation. I can't do this. If you run this code in Python, we will get an error. Now, the reason we'll get an error is because this behavior is not implemented on the string or the int class. A string doesn't know how to add an int to it, and an int doesn't know how to add a string to it. It's not defined behavior. If it was defined, we'd be able to do this. So the way you think about this, a class is the blueprint that defines the behavior that is allowed on an object. An object is an instance of a class. You can have multiple objects, as many as you want, of the same class. So I can have a bunch of ints, I can have a bunch of floats, I can have a bunch of strings. All of these objects are dependent, they're unique, and they use the class to understand what behavior they have access to. Now let's look at a custom class and I'll make this even more clear. All right, so I've got a custom class on the screen. Let's dissect this a little bit, and then I will create an instance and show you how this works. So we have dog class. First of all, this is the name of our class. Any instance we create of this class will be of type dog, because that's the name of our class. Just like of type int, string, etc., that's the name of our class. That's the type of the objects we create using the class. Now, the first method you see here, now this is a function, but we call it a method because it's inside of a class, is what's known as the constructor or the initializer. This is what is called every time you create a new instance. Now, this is called on classes like int, on float, on string. You just don't see it because it's built into the language. So I'm kind of exposing to you what a class looks like, whereas the ones built in are kind of hidden. You don't really see them. Anyways, we have int here, right? And what we take is a name, age, and breed, as well as this self keyword. Now, the self keyword refers to the instance that this is being called on, that this function or this method is being called on. It's important to have that distinction because we have multiple instances. Self is referring to the individual instance that is being called upon or being used in this context. You're going to see what I mean in a second. But when I say something like self.name equals name, I'm saying I want to create an attribute. This is data that's stored on the instance, not on the class, on the instance called name. And I'm making it equal to the name value that I passed to this constructor. Continuing, same with age, same with breed. We'll look at an example in a minute. Now we move down here to our other methods. Now these methods are essentially the behavior of this type, right? The behavior of instances. This class is blueprinting what all of my instances are able to do. So when I put something like bark, this means that I can call the bark method. So I can do something like .bark, right? on any instance of this class because the method is defined. Same thing with getInfo. I can call this getInfo method here, and it will return information about the instance that I called this on. Okay, so enough of that. Let's put this over to the side. Let's look at an example of creating an instance. So let me just zoom in a bit here. Let's say I have dog is equal to dog. Now, first of all, this is how you create an instance of a class if it's not built into Python. You write the name of the class, which is dog, you put your parentheses, and then you pass any required parameters to the constructor. So we need a name, age, and breed. So I'm going to pass Tim. Let's just pass 4. For breed, let's just go with person. I know that's not a dog breed, but can't think of any right now, so we'll go with something that doesn't really make sense. All right, so we passed name, age, person. When we do this, by default, this constructor here, this initializer gets called, and it assigns these attributes to our dog instance. This is one instance, right? Now, if I write something like dog2 is equal to dog, now let's just imagine I have some values in here. I'm not going to write them out. What I've done is created a separate instance. So we have 2 individual instances that all have their own attributes. Now, since they are the same type, they have the same defined behavior. We know that they have a name. We know that they have an age. We know that we have a breed. We don't know what the name, age, or breed is, but we know that they have that because they are type dog. And we know that on both of these instances, I can call the bark method and I can call the getInfo method because that's the defined behavior in the class. So if I go here and I write something like dog.bark, if we were in our terminal, right, if we were actually running this code, you would see that bark would print out. Again, the only reason I can do that is the blueprint, the type, the class has defined this functionality. Okay, very important to understand here as I wrap up this video that each instance stores its own attributes. It has its own information, right? So when I created this first dog and it has Tim for person, then I create this second dog. Me creating this second dog has no effect on this first dog. It doesn't change the name, it doesn't change the age, it doesn't change the breed. They all have their own name, age, and breed because they are instances of the class, okay? The class is the blueprint defining the behavior for the object. The object kind of uses the class to understand what behavior it has access to have its attributes assigned, all of that. Obviously, I could continue going with this for hours upon hours upon hours. The point of this video was to give you a quick understanding of the difference between classes and objects and hopefully conceptualize in your brain, what is a class, what is an object, what do they mean? Key point, class, blueprint, object, instance of the blueprint. Object uses the class to understand what behavior it has. The class defines the behavior of all of the objects. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you like these short explainer videos. I'm happy to do more. Hopefully I'll see you in another YouTube video.